Camp Valor Chow Hall, 1847 hours. 12 Green Berets were about to make the worst mistake of their military careers. Staff Sergeant Ryan Beckett, Silver Star, 3 combat tours, 6'3" of pure muscle and arrogance, watched a girl walk through the door. Not a woman, a girl. 22 years old. Long, dark brown hair loose past her shoulders. Olive green V-neck tight against her small frame. Camouflage pants. No patches, no badges, no name tape. Nothing that said she belonged here. He smiled. His men smiled. 12 predators had just spotted what they thought was prey. They were wrong. Dead wrong. And they were about to find out exactly how wrong in the most humiliating way possible. If you want to see what happens when 12 Special Forces soldiers corner the wrong woman, subscribe now, hit that bell, and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. 12 of them. That was the first thing Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reeves counted when he looked up from his tray. 12 Green Berets moving across the chow hall like wolves who'd caught a scent. He'd been watching the whole thing develop from the corner booth. The booth nobody sat in because it belonged to the old Navy Master Chief, who'd been on base longer than most of these kids had been in uniform. 34 years of service had given Reeves a lot of things. Bad knees, a face like a topographic map of every war zone he'd ever survived, and instincts that screamed at him right now like a fire alarm in a burning building. He knew what was coming. He'd seen this movie before, but this time, the ending was going to be different. These boys just didn't know it yet. She'd walked in 4 minutes ago, quiet, alone, carrying her tray with a kind of steady, level grip that most people wouldn't notice, but that Reeves noticed immediately. Because it was the grip of someone who'd carried things far heavier than a cafeteria tray through far worse places than a military dining facility. Mara Sinclair, 22 years old. Long, dark brown hair hanging loose past her shoulders. An olive green V-neck fitted t-shirt that clung to her small frame. Military camouflage pants tucked into worn combat boots. No unit patches, no deployment badges, no ribbons telling her story across her chest. Just a simple rank insignia on a lanyard around her neck. Chief Petty Officer. A rank that in this army-dominated space meant approximately nothing to the men who were now closing in on her table. She'd found a spot against the back wall. Ghost territory. The table nobody claimed because it was reserved for people who were new, alone, or didn't understand the unwritten politics of military dining. She sat down. She started eating, fork to mouth. Chew, swallow, repeat. Mechanical, efficient. The way someone eats when they've learned that meals are fuel, not leisure. When they've eaten in places where lingering over food could get you killed. None of that mattered to Staff Sergeant Ryan Beckett. What mattered to Beckett was that a girl, a Navy girl, was sitting in his chow hall at a table in his territory, wearing no credentials that justified her presence. And Ryan Beckett was not the kind of man who let that slide. At 34, Beckett was everything a recruiting poster promised and a therapist would worry about. 6'3", 220 pounds of muscle earned through punishment and maintained through obsession. His jaw could have been cut from granite. The silver star on his chest caught light like it was designed to blind anyone who looked at it too long. 3 combat tours, Afghanistan twice, Syria once, had given him the kind of confidence that comes from surviving things that kill other men. He wore his green beret like a crown. His combat beard was regulation pushing, but tolerated because men like Beckett got tolerance that lesser soldiers didn't. He was holding court at the center table when she walked in. Mid-story. Something about a compound raid in Helmand Province that had probably grown more dramatic with each retelling. His squad leaned in, playing their roles, laughing at the right moments, nodding with the gravity of men who understood that listening to Beckett's stories was part of the cost of being in his orbit. Then the door opened, and his attention shifted. He watched her cross the room, watched her sit down, watched her eat without looking up, without acknowledging the social architecture of the space she'd entered. And something in his expression changed. Not anger, not yet. Something more primal. The instinct of a dominant male who'd spotted someone who hadn't paid tribute. "Well," Beckett said, pushing back from his table, "looks like the Navy sent us a care package." Laughter. Immediate. Practiced. The sound of men who knew their cue. Reeves set down his fork. His stomach had just turned to concrete. He knew Beckett, knew the type, had spent 3 decades watching men like him climb ranks and break people along the way. Talented, dangerous, and completely, catastrophically incapable of recognizing when they were outmatched. "Here we go," Reeves muttered to himself. 12 men stood up. They didn't coordinate the movement. It just happened, the way pack behavior happens, instinct overriding individual thought. They followed Beckett across the chow hall like a formation, spreading out as they approached her table, creating a loose semicircle that blocked her from the rest of the room. Not a perfect, menacing circle, clumsier than that, more casual. A swaggering encirclement that was somehow more insulting than overt aggression because it carried the message, "You're not even worth our best intimidation." Mara didn't look up. She'd tracked them from the moment Beckett pushed back his chair, had counted the footsteps, calculated the angles of approach, noted the formation pattern, loose, overconfident, no tactical discipline. 12 men who moved like they'd never had to approach someone who might actually be dangerous. 12. She stored the number, filed it. Data point. Beckett leaned his knuckles on her table. The wood creaked under his weight. Up close, he was even bigger. His shoulders strained the seams of his uniform. The silver star was inches from her face. His combat infantry badge sat above it, polished to a mirror shine. "Well, look at this." His voice boomed across the chow hall. It was a performance voice, pitched for an audience, not a conversation. "Little girl got lost on her way to the PX." The laughter came again, louder this time, more confident. A few of his men slapped each other's shoulders. One of them, a younger sergeant with a thick neck and eager eyes, leaned in closer than the others, trying to match his leader's energy. "Maybe she wandered off from a USO show, Sarge." More laughter, the pack feeding off itself. Mara continued eating. Fork. Chew. Swallow. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the 12 men surrounding her, didn't change the rhythm of her breathing or the pace of her movements. She simply continued her meal, as if the largest, loudest man in the chow hall wasn't leaning over her table with his fists planted like territorial flags. This was the first violation. Beckett's dominance display required acknowledgement. Fear would have been ideal. Anger would have been acceptable. Even contempt would have given him something to work with. But silence? Indifference? The complete absence of reaction? That was something Ryan Beckett had never encountered, and it hit him like a slap. "Hey!" Louder now. His thick finger tapped the table next to her plate. The sound was sharp in the quiet that had spread outward from the confrontation, like ripples in a pond. Conversations at nearby tables had died. Marine infantry in the corner booths had stopped mid-sentence. Air Force maintenance crews near the windows were watching with the careful attention of people who knew they were witnessing something they'd be talking about later. "I'm talking to you, sailor." She finished chewing, swallowed. set her fork down with a soft click against the tray. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her eyes. And Ryan Beckett, for the first time in a very long time, felt something he didn't recognize. Her eyes were dark, not brown, not quite black, dark in the way that deep water is dark. You couldn't see the bottom, couldn't gauge the depth, couldn't tell what was down there waiting. They held no fear, no anger, no nervousness. They held nothing he could use. They simply observed, recorded, catalogued. She was looking at him the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Clinical, detached, already knowing the diagnosis. Beckett straightened slightly. His rhythm was broken, and he knew it, and the fact that he knew it made him push hard. "You know who you're looking at?" It wasn't a question. The phrasing was interrogative, but the tone was pure declaration. A man announcing himself to someone he'd already decided was beneath him. 5th Special Forces Group. 3 tours. We just got back from a rotation that would make your little sailor friends cry into their pillows. Behind him, the thick-necked sergeant snorted. Performative. The sound of a subordinate hitting his mark. "So I'll ask you one more time, sweetheart." Beckett leaned in closer. His voice dropped to a stage whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. "What exactly do you do? Because I'm looking at that uniform, and I'm not seeing a single thing that tells me you belong in my chow hall." Mara's eyes moved. Not her head, just her eyes. They swept across the 12 men behind him, one by one, face by face. She noted rank insignia, unit patches, the casual arrogance in their postures. The way they stood just slightly too close, making her small table feel even smaller. She catalogued each one. Then her eyes returned to Beckett. She gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not a negation, not a denial. Something closer to a dismissal. The gesture of someone deciding that a response simply wasn't worth the energy it would require. It was this, more than anything, that lit the fuse. Beckett's smirk vanished. The easy confidence that had carried him across the room evaporated like water on hot asphalt. He was accustomed to fear. He expected deference. This serene disinterest was an assault on everything his world had taught him about dominance and submission. "Lost your tongue?" The thick-necked sergeant tried again, leaning in with a grin. "Maybe she doesn't speak soldier, Sarge. Probably only knows the difference between port and starboard." More laughter. Encouraged now, the pack smelling what they thought was blood, Mara's eyes returned to Beckett. She held his gaze for a long, still moment. Then she did something unexpected. She checked her watch. It was a small gesture, clinical, like she was timing something, calculating. Not nervous, not intimidated. Measuring. As if this confrontation was an event with a predetermined duration, and she was simply noting how much of it remained. The gesture infuriated Beckett in a way that words never could have. She wasn't engaging with his dominance display. She was treating him like an appointment running long, like he was making her late for something more important. His jaw tightened. A vein pulsed in his neck. And then, with a swift, contemptuous motion, he swept his hand across her table. The tray exploded. Food scattered across the floor. A glass of juice shattered. Mashed potatoes hit the linoleum in a wet slap. A plastic fork skittered under the adjacent table. The sound was sharp, ugly. The sound of a line being crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The entire chow hall went dead silent. Not quiet, silent. The difference between a room where people are listening and a room where people have stopped breathing. Every eye turned to the small table against the back wall, where 12 green berets surrounded a single woman whose meal now decorated the floor. This was the moment. the inflection point, the space where a response was expected. Tears, perhaps, a shouted retort, an angry outburst that would give Beckett the confrontation he needed to justify what he'd just done. Something, anything, that would validate his aggression and confirm the natural order he believed in. He waited for it, a smirk already forming on his lips. Mara looked at the mess on the floor. Tray overturned, food scattered like debris, juice pooling between tiles. Then she looked at her watch again. Then she looked back at Beckett. Her expression had not changed. It was like looking into a camera lens. No emotion, no judgment, just observation, recording, storing. In the corner, Reeves gripped the edge of his table hard enough to turn his knuckles white. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to stand up, to walk over there, to pull rank and shut this down before it went any further. But he didn't move, because he knew Mara Sinclair. Not personally, he'd never spoken to her, but he knew what she was. He'd recognized it the moment she walked through the door, the way she moved, the calluses on her hands visible even from across the room, the trigger finger on her right hand, slightly more developed than the others, the way her eyes had swept the room when she entered. Not in nervousness, but in tactical assessment, the systematic scan of someone who'd walked into rooms with a wrong assessment meant you didn't walk out. He knew she was handling this. He just didn't know how. Slowly, Mara stood. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound shockingly loud in the silence. She was a full head shorter than Beckett. The physical disparity was almost absurd. She bent down, picked up the fallen tray with movements that were efficient to the point of being mechanical, collected the scattered food, gathered the broken glass carefully, piece by piece, without cutting herself, wiped the juice with a napkin. She didn't look at Beckett, didn't acknowledge the 12 men surrounding her, simply performed the task with the efficiency of someone completing a checklist. Then she walked past them. Her shoulder passed within inches of Beckett's arm, but she didn't turn her head, didn't glance up, just walked with that same quiet, measured purpose she'd entered with. She deposited the tray at the cleaning station, placed it on the conveyor with the same care she might have used for sensitive equipment. Then she walked toward the exit, and the silence she left behind was heavier than anything that had preceded it. Beckett's smirk had died. He'd won the confrontation, established dominance, proved his point. But the victory felt hollow, empty. The victory of a man punching smoke. He'd expected a scene, a reaction, the confirmation that his power was real because it could provoke a response. Instead, he got nothing. Just quiet eyes that gave away nothing, and a clean exit that somehow felt more powerful than any retort could have been. The murmuring started back up around the chow hall, but the tone had shifted. It wasn't amusement anymore. It was discomfort. The sound of people not sure what they'd just witnessed, but certain it wasn't what it appeared to be. The thick-necked sergeant tried to break the tension. "Guess the Navy knows when to retreat, huh, Sarge?" A few weak laughs. Beckett didn't laugh. He stared at the exit she'd walked through, and something in his expression, something he'd never admit to and would deny if asked, looked a lot like doubt. In the corner, Reeves slowly pushed his tray away. His appetite was gone. He picked up his tray, dumped it, and left through the side exit. There was nothing to do now but wait. The machine was in motion, and Ryan Beckett had just activated a sequence he couldn't possibly understand. The walk was short. Mara moved through the evening air with the same measured precision she brought to everything. Soldiers passed her without a second glance. Just another junior sailor heading back to quarters. Nobody special, nobody worth noticing. She reached her building, climbed the stairs, unlocked her door. The room was military standard. A bunk with sheets tucked to regulation tightness. A locker with exactly 3 identical uniforms. A desk. And on that desk, a hardened Pelican case that didn't match anything else in the room. She sat down, closed her eyes, let the door click shut behind her. For exactly 7 seconds, she was still. The adrenaline that iron discipline had held in check began to seep away. Not anger, never anger. Anger was noise in the signal. Anger was a vulnerability to be exploited. This was something else, something colder, more useful. She opened the Pelican case. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a suite of electronics that hummed with quiet, lethal energy. A matte black laptop bearing no logos or manufacturer marks. A satellite communications module. An encrypted hard drive. The tools of her actual trade. A trade that Ryan Beckett, for all his silver stars and combat tours, could never imagine. She powered on the laptop. A few keystrokes brought up an encrypted partition. The screen's glow painted her face in pale blue, turning her features into a study of shadow and determination. She began to type. Log entry. Camp Valor Dining Facility. 1847 hours local. Verbal engagement initiated by U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, identified by uniform insignia as Beckett, R. Subject assigned to 5th Special Forces Group. Subject accompanied by 11 additional individuals from same unit. Verbal provocations centered on inter-service rivalry and gendered condescension. Her fingers moved across the keys with the same efficiency she brought to everything. No wasted motion. No editorializing. Just data. 1,848 hours. Subject escalated to physical action. Displaced personal meal tray. Intent. Public humiliation. Objective assessed as successful from subject's perspective. She paused. Replayed the scene in perfect detail. Beckett's weight on the table. The angle of his men's approach. The micro-expression that had crossed his face when she didn't react. A flash of confusion that he'd covered with aggression, the way men like him always did. 1849 hours. Disengaged from situation. No verbal response provided. All 12 individuals visually identified. Logged for future reference. She saved the file. The encryption algorithm wrapped her words in mathematical protection that would take decades to crack. The act was ritual, taking chaotic emotional energy and transforming it into cold, hard data. Data could be stored, analyzed, acted upon. Emotion was just noise cluttering the frequency. She reached for a second, smaller case, opened it. Inside, nestled in its own custom foam, was something that didn't belong in the logistics analyst's quarters. A circular patch, black as midnight. Embroidered in silver thread was a trident piercing through a stylized wave. The weapon's 3 prongs gleamed even in dim light, and the wave curled around the shaft like it was trying, and failing, to pull the trident under. Beneath it, in gray thread so subtle you'd miss it unless you knew to look, was a Latin motto. Per aspera ad mortem. Through hardship to death. It was the unofficial emblem of a unit that did not officially exist. Black Tide, a name that appeared on no organizational charts, claimed no budget line items, and operated in the spaces between the wars that made headlines and the wars that didn't. Mara looked at it for a long moment. Her fingers traced the outline of the trident. The embroidery was raised slightly, textured under her fingertips, a reminder of who she was beyond the plain uniform and the assumptions of men like Beckett. A symbol of the missions she'd completed in places that didn't appear on maps, against enemies that had no names, in darkness so complete that the only thing between her and death was her training and her refusal to quit. She'd earned this patch at 20 years old, in a compound in Yemen, on the worst night of her life, the night her father died. She closed the case. The soft click echoed in the quiet room. Then she opened the smaller, zippered pocket on the inside of her tactical bag and pulled out a leather bracelet. Worn, weathered. The leather was cracked in places, softened by years of wear against skin. There were no markings on it, no insignia, no inscription. Just a simple band of brown leather with a brass clasp that had been repaired at least twice. It had been on her father's wrist the night he died. Master Chief Thomas Sinclair, DevGru. 22 years of service, 47 missions. He'd been the quiet one, too, the one who didn't need to announce himself, the one who let his work speak. He taught her everything, not in formal lessons, but in the way he lived, the way he moved, the way he treated people with respect, regardless of rank, because he understood that rank was just a number, and what mattered was what you did when the lights went out. He died in a compound in Yemen on a Tuesday night in October, 2 years ago. A mission that went wrong in every way a mission could go wrong. Bad intelligence, compromised approach, ambush waiting inside. He'd gotten 3 team members out before the second explosion. The third explosion got him. Mara had been there. Not in the compound. She was on overwatch, 300 meters out, monitoring communications and providing electronic warfare support. She was 20 years old. It was her 6th mission. She heard everything through her headset. Every shout, every gunshot, every explosion. And then her father's voice, calm even at the end. Mara, baby girl, stay on mission. Complete the objective. That's an order. Those were his last words. Not goodbye, not I love you. An order. Because he knew she would follow an order, even when grief was tearing her apart, and he needed her to survive more than he needed sentiment. She'd completed the mission, alone. After the rest of the team was incapacitated, she'd breached the compound by herself, neutralized the remaining hostiles, secured the intelligence package, and carried 2 wounded operators, 1 on each shoulder, 3 kilometers to the extraction point, through hostile territory in complete darkness. She was 20 years old. They'd given her the patch afterward. Black Tide, per aspera ad mortem. They'd offered her a medal, too, but she declined. Medals were for people who wanted to be seen. Mara wanted to be effective. Now she held her father's bracelet in both hands. The leather was warm, as if it still remembered his body heat. She pressed it against her cheek. For one moment, just one, the mask cracked. A single tear traced down her cheek. Just one. It caught the blue light from the laptop screen and glittered like a small private diamond before falling onto the worn leather. "I'll make it right, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. The voice of a daughter, not an operator. "I promise." Then the mask returned. She tied the bracelet around her left wrist, where it would sit against her pulse point, where she could feel it every time her heart beat. She closed the patch case, closed the Pelican case, powered down the laptop. Her mission at Camp Valor was clear. She was here to assess the base's tactical readiness, to probe the defenses, find the gaps in the armor, write the report that would either validate their systems or expose their fatal flaws. The human element, she noted internally, was proving to be the most significant vulnerability of all. She went to bed, not because she was tired, but because there was nothing left to do but wait. The machine was in motion. The gears were turning. And Ryan Beckett had just activated a sequence he couldn't understand, let alone control. Master Chief Reeves found her at 0500 the next morning. She was in the base's tactical training facility, alone. The building was supposed to be locked until 0600, but the lock hadn't stopped her, and Reeves didn't ask how she'd gotten in, because he already knew the answer. and the answer involved skills that weren't taught in any Navy training he was authorized to discuss. He stood in the doorway and watched her work. She was moving through a close-quarters combat drill, not the standard Navy CQB curriculum, not even the advanced SEAL qualification course patterns. This was something else entirely. A fluid, violent choreography that flowed from room entry to threat neutralization to hostage positioning, with a speed that made the individual movements blur together. Her long, dark brown hair was pulled back in a quick ponytail that whipped behind her as she moved. The olive-green V-neck was dark with sweat. Her camouflage pants were tucked into boots that moved across the floor with the silence of a predator. She cleared a simulated room in 1.3 seconds. Reeves knew because he counted. 1.3 seconds. Entry. Assessment. 2 simulated hostiles neutralized. 1 simulated hostage secured. Extraction angle established. Most SEAL teams cleared rooms in 3 to 4 seconds. Elite teams in 2. She'd just done it in 1.3. Alone. Heard there was friction at the chow hall. She didn't stop moving. Transition to the next room. Entry. Assessment. 3 hostiles, 1 civilian. 1.4 seconds. Clean. Situation is being monitored, Master Chief. Reeves nodded, though she couldn't see it. He understood her language. Monitored meant documented. It meant she was in control of whatever response was coming. It meant he didn't need to intervene, because she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever game was being played. Beckett's a pit bull, he said flatly. All muscle, no brain. But a pit bull with a green beret is still a problem. She finished her drill, stood still for a moment, controlling her breathing, then turned to face him. Her eyes were clear, steady. The same eyes that had unnerved Beckett 12 hours ago. All data is useful, Master Chief. The corner of Reeves's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement that he'd taught her father well, and her father had taught her even better. He studied her for a long moment. This girl, this 22-year-old woman with her dark hair and her quiet eyes and her father's bracelet on her wrist, was the most dangerous person on this base. And nobody knew it except him. Your father, he said carefully, would have handled it the same way. Something shifted in her expression. Brief, controlled. A flicker of something human behind the operational mask. My father would have finished his meal first, she said. Reeves almost laughed. Almost. Yeah, he said. He would have. He gave her a single paternal nod. The same nod he used to give Thomas Sinclair before missions. The one that said, I trust you, stay sharp, come home, and left her to her work. Mara turned back to the training room, but her mind was already moving ahead, calculating, planning. Not for revenge, never revenge. For the inevitable moment when Ryan Beckett's path and her capabilities would intersect in a way that couldn't be ignored. And when that moment came, she would be ready. The correction was coming. Beckett just couldn't see it yet. The provocation came the next morning, predictable as sunrise. Mara was underneath a tactical command vehicle in the motor pool, a diagnostic probe connected to the communications suite's data port. Her tablet displayed scrolling lines of encrypted code, frequency maps, signal shielding assessments, encryption protocol vulnerabilities, the kind of data that would look like incomprehensible noise to anyone without her specific expertise. She heard them before she saw them. 3 sets of boots on concrete. The heavy, confident stride of men who believed they owned every square foot of ground they walked on. She slid out from under the vehicle and stood up, tablet in hand, just as Beckett rounded the corner, with 2 of his men flanking him like an honor guard for arrogance. His swagger was amplified today. The Chow Hall victory had inflated him. He'd established dominance, put the Navy in its place, and now he could afford the luxury of magnanimity, or at least the appearance of it, while twisting the knife deeper. Well, well, he drawled the words, letting them carry. A few other soldiers nearby looked up. An audience was always important for men like Beckett. The Navy's got a grease monkey now. What's the matter, sweetheart? Couldn't figure out which end of the boat to mop, so they sent you here to play mechanic? One of his men, a sergeant first class named Dawson, with a jaw like a cinder block, laughed. Careful, Sarge. She might get oil on that pretty little shirt. Mara held the tablet steady. Her eyes were on the screen. She didn't respond. Didn't look up. Just continued reviewing the signal analysis, as if 240 pounds of Green Beret weren't standing 3 feet away, radiating hostility like a space heater. Beckett stepped closer. His eyes went to the tablet. Complex waveform displays, encryption algorithms, frequency maps that looked like abstract art to anyone who didn't speak the language of electronic warfare. Lots of squiggly lines there. He leaned in, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone his men could still hear perfectly. You sure you know what you're looking at? Because I'd hate for you to accidentally break something important while the real operators are trying to get ready for a real mission. Mara's fingers continued working the screen. This is classified diagnostic equipment, Staff Sergeant. Her voice was flat, without inflection, but the use of his full rank was a subtle blade, a reminder that ranks existed, that protocols mattered, that he was currently violating both just by standing this close to equipment he had no clearance to view. Beckett's eyes narrowed. Then he smiled, and then he reached out and plucked the tablet from her hands. It was a flagrant breach. You did not touch another operator's equipment, period. It violated a dozen security regulations and about 1,000 unwritten rules of professional conduct. But Beckett wasn't thinking about protocol. He was thinking about dominance. He turned the tablet around, pretending to study it. His brow furrowed in exaggerated confusion. Yeah, see, this is what I'm talking about. Bunch of nonsense on a fancy screen. You Navy types love your gadgets, don't you? Makes you feel like you're actually contributing. Mara's hand, the one that had been holding the tablet, remained suspended in the air for a fraction of a second. Then she lowered it slowly to her side. Her eyes locked onto his face. Dark, steady, giving away nothing. That device contains classified material, Staff Sergeant. I need you to return it. Classified, Beckett snorted. Right. Relax, Chief. He emphasized the rank with just enough edge to make it sound like an insult. We're all on the same team here, just making sure the support staff is up to snuff for the real operators. He tossed the tablet back. Casual, dismissive, the way you'd toss a tennis ball to a dog. Mara caught it. One hand, clean. Her fingers closed around it with reflexes that didn't come from logistics training. Beckett noticed. For just a half second, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or the beginning of a question he wasn't smart enough to ask. He leaned in closer. His voice dropped. You got a problem with my methods, Chief? You feeling uncooperative? He was baiting her, manufacturing a confrontation he could report, building the paper trail he needed to justify what he was planning. Mara recognized the tactic immediately. She'd seen it used by warlords, intelligence operatives, and corrupt officers in a dozen different countries. The technique was always the same. Provoke a reaction. Document the reaction. Use the documentation as a weapon. She said nothing, just held his gaze with those dark, unreadable eyes. Beckett straightened, satisfied. He'd gotten what he came for. Another non-response he could spin into insubordination. Another data point in his narrative of the uncooperative Navy technician who couldn't handle working with real soldiers. Let's go, boys. We got a real mission to prep for. He walked away, His men followed, laughing, already composing the story they'd tell later. How Sarge put the Navy girl in her place again. How she couldn't even hold on to her own gear. How she stood there like a deer in headlights while the Green Berets showed her what real military looked like. Mara stood in the motor pool, tablet in hand, and watched them go. Then she calmly disconnected her diagnostic probe, packed her equipment, and returned to her workspace. She wasn't angry. She was taking notes. By 1400 hours, the formal complaint had been filed. Mara found out from a second lieutenant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. He was maybe 23, fresh from officer training, and the discomfort on his face was so obvious it was almost painful to look at. Chief Petty Officer Sinclair. He consulted his clipboard like it contained the answers to questions nobody wanted to ask. "Ma'am, I have a report here from Staff Sergeant Beckett, 5th Special Forces Group." Mara looked at him. He was just a messenger, a kid caught between NCOs playing games he didn't understand. "He's filed a formal complaint." The lieutenant's voice was getting quieter with every sentence, like his own words embarrassed him. "It states that you were, and I'm quoting, uncooperative, and displayed a hostile attitude when he requested assistance with his unit's tactical vehicle communications." Mara said nothing, waited. The lieutenant swallowed. "He's requesting that you be reassigned from any support role related to his unit during the upcoming Operation Iron Veil exercise. Command has provisionally approved the request pending review." His eyes finally met hers. "You're to remain in the operations center in a general monitoring capacity only. No direct tactical support to Special Forces elements." There it was, the institutional weapon, deployed with surgical precision. Beckett had used the very system Mara had dedicated her life to, serving as a tool to sideline her. He'd manufactured a conflict where none existed, created a paper trail that documented his version of events, and leveraged the military's bureaucratic machinery to remove the one person on this base who actually understood what was coming in Operation Iron Veil. It was, Mara had to admit, tactically competent. Morally reprehensible, but tactically competent. "Understood, Lieutenant," she said, perfectly neutral. "Thank you for the notification." She turned back to her work, as if the conversation had been about a schedule change. The lieutenant lingered, looking like he wanted to say something else. Apologize, maybe. Or explain that he was just following orders. But Mara didn't look at him again, and eventually he walked away, grateful to be done with a task that felt wrong, even if it was technically proper. Alone again, Mara continued her assessment, but her mind was already processing, already integrating, already seeing the complete pattern. The initial confrontation in the chow hall, the escalation at the motor pool, the formal complaint weaponizing institutional processes. Beckett had painted himself into a corner he couldn't see. He'd created a paper trail that documented his own bias. He'd manufactured a conflict with someone who documented everything with the precision of a forensic investigator. And most importantly, most critically, he'd removed the one person on Camp Valor who could save him from what was coming. That night, Mara sat in her quarters and opened the classified files for Operation Iron Veil. Her fingers moved through the encrypted documents with practiced speed. The exercise scenario loaded on her screen. Maps, threat assessments, operational parameters, force compositions. A high-risk direct-action raid on a fortified compound defended by hostile forces with advanced counter-assault capabilities. Beckett's 12-man team would assault the compound, rescue a simulated hostage, and extract before enemy quick reaction forces could respond. Standard Special Operations Raid Profile. The kind of mission Green Berets train for constantly. Except this one was different. Mara read the technical specifications of the compound's defensive systems, automated gun positions, sensor arrays, counter-assault protocols. The defensive architecture was sophisticated. far more sophisticated than a typical training scenario. Someone had designed this exercise to push the boundaries of what Camp Valor's operators could handle. She read deeper, analyzed the defensive patterns, cross-referenced the sensor configurations with known hostile systems. And then she stopped breathing. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. Her heart, which maintained a resting rate of 52 beats per minute through combat, through explosions, through the worst moments of her life, suddenly accelerated to 90. She knew this compound, not from a briefing, not from a report, not from any training scenario she'd ever studied. She knew it because she'd been there. The defensive layout, the sensor placement, the automated gun positions, the approach angles, the kill zones, every single element of Operation Iron Veil's target compound was modeled on a real structure in Aden, Yemen. A compound she'd helped assault 2 years ago on a Tuesday night in October, when everything went wrong and her father didn't come home. Someone had taken the after-action report, her after-action report, the one she'd written in a hospital bed with 2 broken ribs and her father's blood still under her fingernails, and turned it into a training exercise. They'd used her worst night as someone else's practice scenario. Mara stared at the screen. The blue light cast shadows across her face that made her look older than 22. Made her look like what she was, a young woman who'd seen too much, survived too much, and carried weight that would crush most people twice her age. Her left hand found the leather bracelet on her wrist, her father's bracelet. She pressed her thumb against the worn leather and felt her own pulse beating against it. Stay on mission. Complete the objective. That's an order. His voice, clear as the night he'd said it, as if the leather had absorbed his words and was playing them back through her skin. She released the bracelet. Her breathing steadied. Her heart rate dropped back to 52. The operator was back. The daughter retreated to whatever locked room she lived in, behind whatever armored door kept her safe, while Mara did the work that needed doing. She opened a new file. Not a report this time, a prediction. Her fingers moved with cold precision. She detailed exactly how Operation Iron Veil would unfold, how Beckett's team would approach the compound with standard tactical procedures that were completely inadequate for the threat they'd face, how the automated defenses would activate in a coordinated sequence designed to pin attacking forces in overlapping kill zones, how the communication systems would degrade under the compound's electronic countermeasures, how 12 Green Berets would find themselves trapped, blind, and deaf in a scenario they weren't prepared for. She documented every vulnerability, every gap, every assumption built into Camp Valor's tactical doctrine that a real enemy, or a sufficiently realistic training scenario, could exploit. And then she wrote, in precise, technical detail, exactly how she would defeat the threat if given the opportunity. Every countermeasure, every breach point, every weakness in the compound's defensive architecture that she'd identified 2 years ago when she'd walked through those kill zones in real darkness, with real bullets, stepping over real bodies. She encrypted the file, saved it with a timestamp, closed the laptop. Then she sat in the dark and held the bracelet. "They built it from your mission, Dad," she said to the empty room. "They took what killed you and turned it into a game." The room didn't answer. Rooms never did. "I know every inch of that compound, every sensor, every gun position, every blind spot. I know where you fell. I know where Jackson and Torres got hit. I know the exact angle of the second explosion." She paused. The darkness pressed in around her. "And they just told me I'm not allowed to help." The irony was so perfect, it was almost beautiful. The one person on this entire base who'd actually survived the real version of this exercise, who'd walked through the fire and come out the other side carrying wounded teammates on her shoulders, had just been officially sidelined by a man who thought she was a logistics clerk. Beckett had removed his own lifeline, and didn't even know it. Mara untied the bracelet, held it up in the faint light that seeped through the window blinds. The leather was almost black in the darkness. The brass clasp caught a sliver of light and reflected it back like a tiny star. 3 days, she said. 3 days until Iron Veil. 3 days until 12 men walk into something they don't understand. She tied the bracelet back on her wrist, tight, secure, her father's pulse point against hers. I'll be ready. She went to bed, the dreamless sleep of a weapon waiting to be drawn. 3 days until everything changed. 3 days until Ryan Beckett discovered exactly how wrong he'd been about the quiet girl with the dark hair and the steady eyes. 3 days until the correction began. Reeves found her the next morning at the same time in the same training facility. She was running a different drill. Long-range marksmanship calculations on a ballistic computer, her fingers inputting windage, elevation, Coriolis effect, and thermal differentials with the speed of someone who'd made these calculations under fire so many times they were embedded in her muscle memory. You saw the Iron Veil files, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Master Chief. You recognize the compound? Yes, Master Chief. And Beckett just made sure you can't touch the exercise. Yes, Master Chief. Reeves leaned against the doorframe. His weathered face showed something he rarely let anyone see. Concern. Not for the mission. Not for the exercise. For her. Mara. He dropped rank. They were alone. He'd known her since she was 16 years old, showing up at Devgru's family events on her father's arm, asking questions about electronic warfare that no teenager should have been asking, absorbing information like a sponge designed by DARPA. That compound, your father, I know what it is. Her voice was even, controlled, but something underneath it vibrated at a frequency only Reeves could hear. I wrote the after-action report they used to build the scenario. Every defensive position, every sensor placement, every kill zone, they modeled it exactly. You don't have to be anywhere near that operations center when it goes down. I can have you reassigned to... No. The word was quiet, but absolute. A wall made of 2 letters. I'll be in that operations center, Master Chief. In my monitoring role. Exactly where Beckett put me. Watching my screens, doing my job. She looked at him. Her dark eyes held his with a steadiness that reminded him so powerfully of Thomas Sinclair that for a moment the years collapsed and he was looking at his best friend instead of his best friend's daughter. And when it goes wrong, not if, when, I'll be ready. Reeves studied her for a long time. Then he nodded, once. The same nod he'd given Thomas Sinclair on a dozen missions. The one that said everything that couldn't be said in words. Your father would have played it the same way, he said. My father would have finished his meal first. You already used that one. It's still true. Reeves almost smiled. Almost. 3 days. 3 days. He turned to leave, then stopped. His voice was rough when he spoke again. The last thing Tom said to me before that mission was, "Keep an eye on my girl, Danny. She's going to be better than all of us." He was right. He paused. He was always right about you. Mara's jaw tightened. A muscle worked beneath her skin. Her eyes stayed dry, but something behind them burned with a heat that had nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with love and loss, and the fierce, unbreakable determination of a daughter carrying her father's legacy on her shoulders. Thank you, Master Chief. Reeves left. Mara stood alone in the training facility, her father's bracelet warm against her wrist, and began calculating approach vectors for a compound she'd already breached once, on the worst night of her life. This time, she'd be ready for every variable. This time, nobody else was going to die. In 3 days, Operation Iron Veil would launch. In 3 days, 12 Green Berets would walk into a scenario built from her father's death and her survival. In 3 days, Ryan Beckett would discover that the quiet girl he'd been trying to break was the only thing standing between him and catastrophic failure. But Beckett didn't know any of that. Beckett was in his team room, running his men through pre-mission drills, feeling confident and prepared and ready for anything. He had no idea that the woman whose meal he'd swept to the floor was the only person alive who'd actually survived the real version of what he was about to face. And he had no idea that she was going to save his life anyway. Not because he deserved it, because that's what her father would have done. 3 days passed like a held breath. Operation Iron Veil launched at 0600 hours on a Thursday morning, so cold that frost crept across the ground like a warning nobody read. Beckett's 12-man assault team loaded into 2 Black Hawks before dawn, their faces painted, their gear checked 3 times over, their confidence absolute. They were Green Berets, 5th Special Forces Group. They'd trained for this kind of mission their entire careers. A compound raid was as natural to them as breathing. Mara arrived at the operations center at 5:30, early enough to be professional, not early enough to draw attention. Her long, dark brown hair was pulled back in the tight bun that regulations required. Her olive green V-neck sat beneath her standard working uniform top. The leather bracelet on her left wrist was hidden under her sleeve, but she could feel it against her pulse. Steady, warm, her father's heartbeat ghosting against her own. She made her way to the auxiliary station she'd been assigned, a single workstation tucked in a corner away from the main action. A monitor with access to general network diagnostics, a chair, a desk. A position designed to make someone present but invisible, exactly where Beckett had wanted her. She logged in, ran her assigned diagnostics. Routine, boring, the work of someone who'd been deliberately sidelined. But on a secondary monitor, one she'd angled away from casual observation, she pulled up something nobody had told her to access. A raw spectral feed from Camp Balor's sensor array, displaying every electromagnetic signal within range. Unprocessed, unfiltered. A cascading waterfall of colors that would look like visual noise to anyone without her expertise. To Mara, it was a language she spoke the way other people spoke English. Colonel James Archer stood on the command platform, coffee in one hand, tablet in the other. 54 years old, infantry to the bone, the kind of commander who took training seriously because he'd seen what happened when commanders didn't. He'd earned his stars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a dozen places that never made the news. "All stations, this is Valor Base," he said into his headset. "Confirm ready status." The responses came in rapid succession. Communications, green. Intelligence, green. Fires coordination, green. Electronic warfare. Major Lisa Chen's station reported green, her team monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum on systems that cost more than most people's houses. "Valor Base, Iron Hand." Beckett's voice came through the speakers, clear and confident. 12 operators on the ground. Insertion complete. Beginning movement to phase line Alpha. Archer nodded. "Copy, Iron Hand. Proceed as planned. Intel shows target compound at normal activity levels." The first hour went exactly as expected. Too smoothly, Mara thought. She watched the blue icons representing Beckett's team creep across the tactical display. They moved well. She'd give them that. Tactical spacing, good communication discipline, smooth transitions between movement techniques. Whatever else Beckett was, the man knew how to lead a ground team. At 0648 hours, Beckett's voice returned. "Valor Base, Iron Hand, phase line Bravo, continuing mission, no contact." "Copy, Iron Hand. No change to intel picture." Mara's eyes never left her spectral display. The waterfall of colors cascaded down her screen in patterns she read like sheet music. Normal, normal, normal. Then at 0712 hours, she saw it. A spike. Brief. Less than a second. A tiny anomaly in the background noise across multiple frequency bands that anyone else would have dismissed as atmospheric interference. Mara didn't dismiss it. Her fingers moved to her keyboard. She isolated the moment, ran it through pattern recognition algorithms that existed in her training more than in any software. The spike resolved into structure. A digital handshake. Two systems synchronizing their clocks, preparing to coordinate. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She'd seen this exact signature before. In Yemen, 30 seconds before the compound's automated defenses activated and turned her father's mission into a massacre. Her heart rate held at 52. Her breathing didn't change. But her left hand found the leather bracelet under her sleeve, and she pressed her thumb against it hard enough to feel the brass clasp dig into her skin. Stay on mission. Complete the objective. She opened a secondary analysis window and began tracking the anomaly with every tool at her disposal. The official tools on her assigned workstation. The unofficial tools she'd loaded from her encrypted drive. And the most powerful tool of all, the memory of a 20-year-old girl lying in the dirt outside a compound in Yemen, listening to automated gun systems cycle up while her father's voice gave his last order. At 0718 hours, she found the second spike. Longer this time, more defined. A system test. Something was waking up inside that compound, running self-diagnostics, checking its targeting parameters. Mara's jaw tightened. This wasn't right. The exercise scenario she'd read called for human role players defending the compound with simulated weapons. Standard opposing force. Nothing automated. Nothing electronic. Certainly nothing that would produce the kind of electromagnetic signature she was seeing on her screen. Someone had changed the exercise parameters. She started running calculations she hoped she wouldn't need. Approach vectors, breach points, system vulnerabilities. The compound's automated defenses had specific blind spots. She knew because she'd found them in Yemen, in the dark, with bullets flying, while her father lay dying 50 meters behind her. At 0724 hours, Beckett reported in. Valor Base, Iron Hand, Phase Line Charlie, staging for final approach. Ready to execute breach on your call. Iron Hand, Valor Base, you are cleared for breach. Execute, execute, execute. Copy, executing. Mara watched the blue icons accelerate toward the compound. 12 men moving fast, moving confident, moving directly into something they didn't understand. Her spectral display erupted. The handshake signature she'd been tracking exploded into full activation. Multiple systems coming online simultaneously. Automated targeting arrays, sensor nets, electronic countermeasure emitters. The electromagnetic spectrum around the compound lit up like a Christmas tree made of threat warnings. This wasn't a training scenario. This was the Yemen compound, exactly as it had been 2 years ago. Every system, every configuration, every kill zone. And 12 men had just walked into the middle of it. The operations center didn't understand yet. The main tactical displays still showed green. The communications links were still active. For about 6 more seconds, everything looked normal. Then the compound's defenses activated, and the world ended for Ryan Beckett and his team. It happened all at once. Communications crashed. Every frequency dissolved into aggressive static. Not random noise, but intelligent jamming that anticipated and countered every attempt to find a clear channel. GPS signals vanished. The blue icons on the tactical display flickered, froze, and began to fade as the system lost confidence in their accuracy. 12 men had just gone dark. Warning alarms erupted across the operations center. Red cascaded across every screen. Major Chen's electronic warfare station lit up with alerts she'd never seen in training. Her voice cut through the noise, professional but strained. Total communications lost with Iron Hand. All frequencies compromised. Jamming across full spectrum. Colonel Archer's coffee cup hit the desk hard enough to crack the ceramic. What the hell just happened? Chen's hands flew across her console. Massive electronic countermeasures, sir. Full spectrum, adaptive. Every time we try to find a clear frequency, the jamming follows us there. This is way beyond the exercise scenario. Can you counter it? We're trying, sir, but this is... I don't know how to describe it. This is professional grade. This is nation-state level capability. The Op 4 shouldn't have anything close to this. Archer turned to his intelligence officer. Is this part of the exercise? The officer checked his screens, checked his briefing documents, checked his screens again. Negative, sir. The scenario called for simulated resistance from role players. Nothing automated, nothing electronic. This is not what we planned. Archer felt ice form in his stomach. Then what is it? Nobody had an answer. 3 minutes passed. 5. 7. Each one an eternity for officers watching 12 operators disappear into an electronic black hole. The operations center had devolved into controlled chaos. Technicians shouting diagnostics. Officers running protocols that accomplished nothing. Major Chen coordinating counter-jamming efforts that were like throwing rocks at a hurricane. At 0731 hours, a broken transmission punched through the static. Emergency frequency, low power, barely audible. Beckett's voice, strained. Professional, even in crisis, but with an edge that Mara recognized. She'd heard it in her own teammates' voices in Yemen, in the moment when training meets reality, and reality wins. Valor Base, Iron Hand, we are pinned. Multiple automated positions, heavy fire. Cannot maneuver, cannot communicate, simulated and... Static ate his words. Some of these systems are cycling at velocities that do not feel... More static. Request immediate... Dead air. The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. Archer stood absolutely still on the command platform. His face had gone from stern to something worse. He'd commanded soldiers in combat. He knew what it sounded like when a leader realized his team was in a situation that training hadn't prepared them for. Beckett had been about to say something that would change everything about this exercise. Some of these systems are cycling at velocities that do not feel simulated. Get me a status on those automated defense systems, Archer ordered. I want to know if they're operating within exercise safety parameters. Now. A technician at the range control station went pale. Sir, I'm showing... This can't be right. He rechecked his data. Rechecked it again. Sir, the automated gun positions in the compound are cycling at 92% of their live fire velocity. Exercise parameters cap them at 40%. The room went silent. 92%. The rounds were still training ammunition, non-lethal marking rounds, but at 92% velocity, they hit with enough force to break bones, crack ribs, rupture organs if they struck the wrong spot. This wasn't a training exercise anymore. This was a genuine threat to 12 lives. How? Archer's voice was quiet, controlled. The voice of a commander who needed answers before he needed to shout. How did the parameters change? Unknown, sir. The safety override should have prevented. I don't understand how. Shut it down. We can't, sir. The jamming is blocking our remote access to the compound's control systems. We can't reach the safety overrides because the same electronic warfare that's blinding our communications is protecting the compound's defensive network. Archer absorbed this. 12 men, pinned, under fire from automated systems operating at near lethal parameters. No communications. No way to reach them by radio. No way to shut down the systems remotely. Options, he said. Give me options. Major Chen spoke first. We can try to overpower the jamming with our own transmitters. Brute force approach. But the compound systems are adaptive. Every time we push, they push back harder. How long? Hours, maybe longer. And I'm not confident it would work. Physical approach? Send a team to manually shut down the systems? His operations officer shook his head. Any team approaching the compound would face the same automated defenses. We'd be sending more people into the same kill zone. The clock was ticking. Every minute, 12 men were taking fire from systems that didn't care about human safety parameters, because whatever was controlling them had been told, or had decided, that the rules no longer applied. And then Archer saw her. In the corner of the operations center, away from the chaos, sitting at the auxiliary workstation that nobody had looked at twice since the exercise began, Chief Petty Officer Mara Sinclair. The quiet Navy girl that Beckett had banished to the monitoring desk. She wasn't panicking, wasn't shouting, wasn't staring at her screens with the helpless frustration that everyone else was displaying. She was watching her spectral display with the focus of someone who was reading, understanding, finding answers in the noise that everyone else saw as chaos. Archer made a decision. He stepped down from the command platform and walked directly toward her station. Conversations died as people noticed the colonel moving with purpose. Eyes followed him across the floor. Mara didn't turn. Her focus remained absolute on her display. Chief Sinclair. She turned, met his eyes, and Archer, who'd been commanding soldiers for 3 decades, felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. There was no fear in those eyes, no uncertainty, just calm assessment and absolute confidence. Sir, can you tell me what's happening to my men? She held his gaze for 1 heartbeat, 2. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who didn't need volume to command attention. The compound's automated defense systems have been reprogrammed, Colonel. The exercise parameters have been overridden. The safety governors on the gun positions have been bypassed. Your men are under fire from systems operating at near lethal velocity. And the electronic warfare suite protecting those systems is specifically designed to prevent remote shutdown. Archer stared at her. How do you know all of this? Because I've seen this before, sir. Not in training. In combat. She paused. This compound, the defensive layout, the sensor placement, the automated systems, is an exact replica of a hostile compound in Aden, Yemen. I breached that compound 2 years ago. The electronic warfare architecture that's blinding your systems right now is identical to the system I defeated in the field. Major Chen had moved close enough to hear. Her face showed shock that was rapidly converting to disbelief. That's impossible. The Yemen compound data is classified above your clearance level, Major. Yes. Mara's eyes didn't leave Archer's, but not above mine. Archer processed this in the span of a single breath. The quiet sailor, the empty uniform, the complete absence of credentials that Beckett had interpreted as proof of insignificance. It was proof of the opposite. In the special operations world, the less you advertised, the more dangerous you were. Who are you? He asked, the question that should have been asked days ago. Senior Chief Petty Officer Mara Sinclair, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Black Tide. The name dropped into the room like a grenade with a pin pulled. Chen took a physical step backward. 2 senior NCOs who'd been hovering nearby exchanged looks that communicated volumes. Black Tide was a ghost story, a rumor, the unit that special operators whispered about when they wanted to scare each other. Archer's jaw tightened. He didn't waste time on surprise. Good commanders didn't. Can you stop it? I can defeat the electronic warfare system remotely and restore your communications. That's step one. But the automated gun positions are on an isolated circuit, a standalone system that can't be reached through the network. Someone has to physically enter the compound and shut them down at the source. How long for step one? 4 minutes. Chen made a choking sound. Her entire team had been working the problem for 12 minutes and had accomplished nothing. And step two, the physical shutdown? I'll do it myself. The words landed like stones in still water. Around the operations center, everyone who heard them went still. You're going to enter a compound that has 12 pinned operators and automated gun systems cycling at 92% velocity. Alone. I know the compound, Colonel. Every sensor, every gun position, every blind spot. I walked through it once in darkness, with live fire. I can do it again. Archer looked at her. 22 years old, 5'3", long dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, olive green shirt under her uniform top, a leather bracelet barely visible at her wrist. She looked like someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone you'd walk past in the grocery store without a second glance. She looked like absolutely nothing. And that, Archer realized, was exactly the point. Do it, he said. Both steps. Now. Mara stood. She moved to the primary tactical terminal with a fluid precision that made Major Chen step aside without thinking. The instinctive response of someone recognizing a predator entering its hunting ground. Her fingers hit the keyboard and the screen transformed. She wasn't using the standard interface. She was accessing systems through classified protocols with security clearances that made the Operations Center's senior technicians stare at their screens, and then at each other, and then at the small woman who was apparently authorized to access things they didn't even know existed. Isolating the primary jamming node, she said. Her voice was a steady monotone, the calm narration of a surgeon describing each cut as she made it. The electronic warfare architecture uses a 3-node decentralized network. Primary node coordinates. Secondary and tertiary nodes provide signal strength. If I can disrupt the synchronization handshake between the nodes, the entire network collapses. Her fingers moved faster. Code scrolled across the screen. Injecting false timing data into the coordination protocol. The nodes think they're synchronized, but I'm feeding them offset values. In approximately 90 seconds, the timing mismatch will cascade through the system, and the jamming will fail. Chen watched over her shoulder, her expression oscillating between professional awe and personal humiliation. Everything Mara was doing was theoretically sound, but practically impossible. Except she was doing it. 60 seconds. 30. 10. The spectral display shifted. The wall of red and yellow that had been drowning every frequency began to fracture. Gaps appeared. Clean channels emerged like blue sky breaking through storm clouds. Then the jamming collapsed. Not gradually, not in stages. It simply stopped, as if someone had thrown a switch. The waterfall display returned to normal, blues and greens showing a clean electromagnetic spectrum. Every speaker in the operations center crackled to life simultaneously. Valor Base, Iron Hand! Beckett's voice burst through, raw, strained, the voice of a man who'd been drowning and had just broken the surface. We have comms. Repeat, we have comms. We are still pinned by automated fire. 3 gun positions, taking continuous hits. 2 men down with possible injuries. Request immediate assistance. Mara was already moving. She'd stripped off her uniform top before the last word left Beckett's mouth. The olive green V-neck underneath was the same one she'd worn in the chow hall. She pulled her hair out of its bun. No time for regulation. And her long, dark brown hair fell past her shoulders as she moved toward the armory cage at the back of the operations center. "Chief Sinclair!" Archer called after her. She didn't stop, didn't slow down. She reached the armory cage, entered a code that the armory sergeant had never seen anyone use, and the cage opened. In 60 seconds flat, she had a tactical vest over her V-neck, a sidearm on her thigh, and breaching equipment across her back. Her camouflage pants were the same ones she'd worn every day, the ones Beckett's men had laughed about. Turns out they were combat-rated after all. She turned back to Archer. Her dark eyes were clear, focused. The eyes of an operator about to do what operators do. "I need a vehicle. Fastest thing on this base." "Sergeant Torres," Archer said to the nearest NCO, "get her whatever she needs." Torres looked at the 22-year-old woman in the olive green V-neck and the tactical vest and the dark hair falling around her shoulders. And he didn't hesitate for even a half second. Whatever he saw in her eyes was enough. "Yes, sir. Follow me, Chief." Mara was out the door before he finished the sentence. In the operations center, Archer keyed his radio. "Iron Hand, Valor Base. Hold your position. Help is coming." Beckett's voice came back, confused and desperate. "Valor Base, what kind of help? We need a full QRF with electronic warfare support and—" "I'm sending one operator, Iron Hand. Trust me on this." The silence that followed was the silence of a man trying to process the idea that one person was the solution to a problem that 12 couldn't solve. "One operator," Beckett repeated. "Sir, with respect, we have automated gun systems that—" "Staff Sergeant," Archer's voice cut like a blade. "The operator I'm sending has breached this exact compound before, in combat, in Yemen. She knows every gun position, every sensor, every blind spot. She's the only person alive who survived the real version of what you're facing right now." Dead silence on the radio. Then Beckett's voice, smaller now, stripped of everything except the raw, honest confusion of a man whose world was rearranging itself in real time. "She?" Archer looked at the door Mara had just disappeared through. "You picked the wrong woman to underestimate, Staff Sergeant. Now hold your position and stay alive until she gets there." The connection went silent. On the drone feed, a single vehicle was already tearing across the terrain toward the compound, trailing dust like a comet's tail. Behind the wheel, barely visible through the windshield, was a young woman with long dark brown hair and steady hands, and her father's bracelet beating against her pulse. She reached the compound perimeter in 9 minutes. The drone feed showed her exit the vehicle in a single fluid motion and disappear into the compound's outer structure before the dust had settled. In the operations center, every screen switched to the drone's thermal overlay. A single heat signature moving through the compound with impossible speed and precision. She was clearing rooms. 1.2 seconds. Entry. Assessment. Passed the first gun position through its blind spot. The same blind spot she'd found in Yemen when a bullet meant for her head had missed by 2 inches because she read the sensor's coverage angle correctly. Beckett's team showed as a cluster of heat signatures pinned behind cover near the compound's center. 3 automated gun positions formed a triangulated kill zone around them. Every few seconds, the guns cycled, visible on thermal as brief heat blooms at the barrel, sending training rounds at velocities that could shatter bone. Mara didn't approach from the direction anyone expected. She went underground. Service tunnels that weren't on the standard compound blueprints, but were on hers, because she'd crawled through the real ones in Yemen, in the dark, with her father's blood on her hands. She emerged behind the first gun position. The drone feed showed her heat signature appear like a ghost, materializing from the floor. She reached the control panel. Her hands found the manual override. The same location, the same configuration, the same system she'd shut down 2 years ago. The first gun went silent. In the operations center, a technician whispered, "How is she doing this?" Nobody answered. Nobody could. She moved to the second gun position. Faster now. The route was muscle memory. Left turn, 12 meters. Right turn, through the access hatch, up the maintenance ladder. She'd done this in darkness. Doing it with the drone's infrared light painting her path was almost easy. Second gun, offline. Beckett's voice erupted on the radio. "Valor Base, one of the gun positions just went down, then another. What is—" "Hold position, Iron Hand." The third gun was the hardest. It always had been. In Yemen, this was where the second explosion had happened, where her father had been standing when the blast wave caught him, where she'd found him afterward, still conscious, still giving orders, still being the quiet professional, even as his life bled out onto foreign soil. Mara reached the third gun's control room. The manual override was behind a reinforced panel. In Yemen, she'd used a breaching charge. Today, she didn't have one. She used her hands. The drone feed showed her heat signature pressed against the panel, pulling, wrenching, her small frame generating force that shouldn't have been possible, but was, because adrenaline and training and the memory of her father's voice combined into something that transcended physical limitation. The panel gave. She reached inside, found the override switch. The third gun went silent. The compound was quiet. Every automated system offline. Every gun position neutralized. Every threat eliminated by a single operator who'd walked through the same hell 2 years ago and had come back to walk through it again. Mara stood in the control room, breathing hard, surrounded by disabled equipment. Her olive green V-neck was dark with sweat. Her long, dark brown hair was wild around her shoulders. The leather bracelet on her wrist was warm from exertion and proximity to machinery, and she pressed it against her cheek for one heartbeat. "Mission complete, Dad." Then she keyed her radio. Her voice was steady, calm, as if she'd just finished a routine maintenance check, instead of single-handedly breaching a hostile compound and neutralizing 3 automated weapons systems. "Valor Base, Trident 1. Compound secure. All automated systems offline. Iron Hand is clear to move." In the operations center, nobody breathed. Then Archer keyed his radio, and his voice carried something that sounded a lot like awe. "Copy, Trident 1. Outstanding work." On the ground, Beckett's team was moving, emerging from cover, checking their wounded. 2 men with deep bruising from training rounds that hit at velocities they were never supposed to reach. But alive. All 12 of them. Alive. Beckett walked through the compound toward the control room. His weapon was up out of habit, but there was nothing left to fight. Just empty corridors and silent gun positions, and the evidence of someone who'd moved through this space like a ghost with surgical precision. He reached the control room and stopped in the doorway. She was standing with her back to him, small, 5'3", long dark brown hair loose around her shoulders, olive green V-neck dark with sweat, camouflage pants tucked into the same worn combat boots she'd been wearing in the chow hall 4 days ago. The quiet Navy girl, the logistics clerk, the support staff he'd swept a meal tray away from because she wasn't worth the space she occupied in his territory. She turned and looked at him. Those eyes. Dark. Steady. The same eyes that had looked at him across a chow hall table without a trace of fear. The same eyes that had watched him sweep her food to the floor without a flicker of anger. Now those eyes held something else. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just the quiet, steady gaze of a professional who'd completed her mission, who'd done what needed doing, who'd saved 12 lives because that was the job, regardless of whether those lives belonged to people who'd treated her with respect or people who'd treated her like dirt. Beckett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That was you," he said. His voice was hoarse, raw, stripped of everything that had made him loud and confident and certain of his place in the world. "You shut down the guns. You cleared the compound. Alone." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she checked her watch, the same gesture that had infuriated him in the chow hall. But this time he understood it. She wasn't dismissing him. She was calculating. Always calculating. "Your 2 wounded need medical attention, Staff Sergeant. Deep tissue bruising from training rounds at unauthorized velocity. Nothing life-threatening, but they'll need imaging to rule out fractures." She walked past him. Her shoulder passed within inches of his arm, just like it had in the chow hall. But this time, Beckett stepped aside. Not because she asked him to, because something in him understood, finally, fundamentally, that he was standing in the presence of someone who operated at a level he couldn't comprehend. She walked out of the compound and into the morning light, and Ryan Beckett stood alone in a room full of disabled weapons and the ruins of every assumption he'd ever made about what strength looked like. 48 hours. That's how long it took for the after-action reports to be compiled, for Colonel Archer to make certain phone calls to certain offices that have no official addresses, and for the full weight of what had happened during Operation Iron Veil to settle onto Camp Valor like a slow-rolling storm that everyone could see coming, but nobody could stop. The conference room filled at 900 hours on Saturday morning. Colonel Archer sat at the head of the table, his uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass, his expression carved from something harder than stone. To his right sat Master Chief Reeves, his weathered face carefully neutral, though something lived behind his eyes that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like the look of a man watching the final act of a play he'd seen rehearsed 100 times. Major Chen occupied a chair further down. She'd spent the past 2 days rewriting every assumption she'd ever held about electronic warfare, and the technical reports stacked in front of her were meticulously prepared, professionally presented, and utterly damning in their conclusions. On the wall, a secure video teleconference screen displayed a face that made every person in the room sit straighter. Rear Admiral Victoria Kane, 57 years old, silver stars on her collar, enough ribbons on her chest to wallpaper a small room. She was Deputy Commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, and the expression she wore could have frozen the Potomac in August. And then there were the Green Berets. Ryan Beckett stood at attention near the back wall. His uniform was immaculate. His bearing was regulation perfect. But the man inside that uniform was unrecognizable from the one who'd swaggered through a chow hall 4 days ago. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. What remained was harder to read, something between devastation and the first fragile stirrings of understanding. Behind him stood his 11 men, the same 11 who'd surrounded the small table in the dining facility, who'd laughed when their sergeant swept a tray to the floor, who'd thought they were teaching a lesson to someone who needed to learn her place. They stood now with the rigid posture of soldiers who knew they were in catastrophic trouble, but couldn't yet see the full scope of it. At the far end of the table sat Mara Sinclair. Her long, dark brown hair was down, falling past her shoulders the way it had in the chow hall. Her olive green V-neck, her camouflage pants, the leather bracelet on her left wrist. She looked exactly the same as she had 4 days ago, the same woman they'd dismissed, mocked, and tried to break. But nothing about her felt the same. Not anymore. Not after what they'd watched her do on that drone feed. She'd positioned herself where she could see everyone in the room without turning her head. Old habit. The habit of someone who'd operated in environments where situational awareness was the difference between going home and going home in a box. Archer opened the proceedings. His voice was formal, precise, the language that military bureaucracy demanded for events that would become permanent record. This after-action review convenes at 0900 hours for Operation Iron Veil, conducted at Camp Valor, Virginia. Dates of execution, November 14th through 16th. Present are